Well, thanks so much everyone for joining us today. Really excited for this workshop. And today's session is really going to cover, I would say, three main pieces and key steps when you're all online presenting. So the big one is going to be creating that presentation. We're going to be reviewing some tips to really focus on how to create a very concise presentation. Then we're going to dive into preparation. So this is often where you'll actually spend the most time. We're going to look at some memorization strategies, how you're screen sharing using speaking prompts and a PowerPoint at the same time. I have 3 monitors going right now, but I could probably even use more for this. We're going to dive into some of those public speaking necessities, so looking at your pace, your tone, your expression. And then the last big piece is that presentation piece. So how to make eye contact with folks that maybe don't have their cameras on, how do you engage with an online audience? And I really hope that this is beneficial and tangible. It is going to be a lot of me kind of speaking and sharing some tips and tricks. I know for myself personally, I find with these online workshops, I'm a bit thrown or put on the spot if I have to go into a breakout room right away or practice those tips. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions at any time. I want to make this as conversational as possible, but please note that I won't be putting you into breakout rooms and having you do a pitch at the end of this presentation. If that is something in the future that we would like to add in, we can definitely do that. But today, you can just feel free to turn your camera off, you can be on mute and just really take notes. And I hope there's some tangible skills that you can get out of this workshop today. And as I said, please pop any questions that you have in the chat. I am going to put it on my other monitor just so I can see the chat going at the same time, but feel free to unmute if you have any questions. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jessie Kennedy, and I'm a proud U of G alumni. I spent about 4 years in the admission and recruitment office at the U of G as a liaison officer, where I did 3 contracts. And essentially, my role was to present to Ontario high school students, parents, and supporting members all about the U of G in various forms. So that role, I had so many types of presentations, whether it was a 30-minute presentation to high school students, or it was a 5-minute panel and I was sitting in a room with other universities, or sometimes I spoke at our open house events in front of 400, 500 people, and it was all about the admission process of applying to the U of G. In 2019, I transitioned into the national recruitment position. So I had the chance to travel across Canada and really connect with students on the East Coast and the West Coast. And then I finished up my journey in that office where I actually had the opportunity to train our contract liaison staff. And that was really a full circle moment for me because I had previously done that role for 3 years. When I came into that role, it was in 2020. So I was really responsible for implementing our very first cycle of recruiting high school students virtually, and online presenting was something that I had to adapt to very quickly, and really looking forward to sharing some tips with you folks today. Outside of my full-time job, I also work in the athletics department as a sports information assistant. I do a lot of stats coverage. I log into the social media account and post some updates. Very excited that sports are coming back this week. And I also write some articles for their website. I currently work with the Griffin football team as a marketing and community engagement specialist. So I really focus on getting our players into the community, and I support with game day setup. And of course, I work in the Wood Center as the program coordinator, marketing, events, and external relationships. When we were putting together this workshop series, we thought that this topic would be interest to really a variety of audience members. So maybe you're a student and you have a lot of online presentations this semester. Maybe you are an entrepreneur and you want to build your confidence when you're pitching to investors, or maybe you work at the University of Guelph and you want to be able to lead some more engaging meetings with your team. And I hope this skill set that you learned today will be tangible and something that you can take back into your everyday life and really apply it to kind of everyday public speaking, whether that's personally or professionally, and really work on those communication skills. It was great to hear from you. I'm just looking at the chat here in the beginning on where you're coming from, but I wouldn't mind if you could just take a few moments and post in the chat, maybe why did you choose to attend this workshop today? What maybe stuck out to you in the description when you heard about it on social media or online? And also maybe just what you're hoping to learn today. I think what's really unique about our workshop series is we have folks from all over the community within the U of G, externally. I see we have some staff members joining. So just take a few moments, pop in the chat, maybe what stuck out to you, why you're interested to learn about this topic, and maybe what you're hoping to get out of this session today. So we'll give everyone a few moments and then we'll come back to the chat. Okay, So someone said switching between online platforms and hosting meetings, and they are slightly different. I would definitely agree with that. And I feel like, I don't know about you, but there's an update on a new platform, I feel like every single day. Getting shy most of the time, I agree, especially when presenting to a webcam, it can be very difficult. Staying engaged online, not looking at notes. I agree. Yep, Ashley, don't know where to look. New to online presentations. Awesome. Meetings every day. I agree, Michael. Awesome. Present to clients frequently. Hey, Sawyer. Sawyer and I used to work together. It's a fun moment. Awesome. Building connections. Well, this is perfect because this is exactly what we have planned in the session today. And Wendy, I see your question about Discord. Teo, would you mind maybe popping in the chat the Discord link again and maybe just sharing a bit? I see April's popping some info in there, which is awesome. Perfect. Okay, well, let's dive in. We have we'll go until right before 1 o'clock because I recognize many of you have class and meetings, so we will stick on time. But thank you so much. That's really helpful to know that this is what you're interested in. So let's dive into the first part of this presentation, and it's creating the content. So writing your presentation, but know when I mean presentation, I'm using that really as a loose term. So maybe you're writing a presentation for a pitch, maybe you are writing your speaking notes, or maybe you're even preparing for an interview and you need to prepare your answers for the questions. So the biggest thing that I can suggest is starting with a brain dump for any presentation that you're about to give, and you want to write down any and all ideas that you have for a presentation. I personally like to use OneNote because it's one big document. I can track everything. I also have the app on my phone. So if I'm, walking to a different building on campus and think about something, I'll just add it to the document and I don't have to worry about missing it later. If you were preparing for an interview, I encourage you to write down a list of all the experiences that you've had, both the good and the bad. It doesn't need to be in order. It doesn't need to be kind of from your last current job, but essentially start with any ideas that you have. And I want you to keep them in a list, and you want to start big and write everything down. When I was preparing for this presentation, I started with a list of all the stories that I wanted to share, some really tangible tips. It was in no particular order. I just really started with that brain dump and I put everything on one document. From there, that's when you're going to want to pull everything into themes. That's how you're going to make it flow, and then also how you're going to make it logical. And then once you kind of have your main sections, that's when you're going to start the process of actually piecing everything together. And I would suggest using segues to connect your presentation together. There's really two main reasons I would incorporate segues into a presentation. One, it's going to make it seem much more polished. It's going to help your presentation flow nice from kind of one section to the other. It's not going to seem as segmented. And also it's going to help with memory. When I was writing a presentation, when I worked in the recruitment office, we had a few different sections in the presentation, and we had to have a little bit of a speaking blurb about every degree program. I think the university is up to maybe 13 degree programs. So I had to memorize my order of talking about, the BCom program, engineering, computing, sciences. And if I messed up one of my sections, I threw my whole presentation off because I couldn't remember where I was going next. So segues are a really great strategy to help you kind of flow and connect your presentation together. And your segues don't need to be complicated. They can be very simple. They could be asking a question, taking a sip of water. They can maybe be highlighting an event. One of my coworkers, when he was putting together his presentation, he was highlighting the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program. And Wes was the most confident person. He was so witty. He could pull off any dad joke. He was hilarious, an amazing presenter. And he had a joke. I'm not going to be able to do it justice, but it was something about how the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program really relates to that song. You can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. And I'm not doing it justice, but he had some joke about that. He introduced it that way. And then he finished his little speaking point by saying, so it turns out with the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program, you can actually get what you want and what you need. I was like, oh, I'm going to try it. It'll be great. I added it to my presentation. And I'm still cringing thinking about when I got up in front of my boss and I presented and I tried to say that line. And as soon as I got to that piece in my presentation, I stopped smiling, I got nervous, I was speaking really fast, because that type of joke just doesn't align with my personality and my strengths. So when you're writing your presentation, yes, it needs to be appropriate for your audience, which we'll get to in a little bit, but it also needs to reflect your personality. Like, are you one that can make jokes and you can pull them off with knowing that your audience won't be laughing because they have their audio turned off or they have their camera turned off. So if you can pull off a quote and you can pull off a joke, 100% you should be including it in your presentation. But if you feel awkward saying it to yourself when you're practicing, there is no way you're going to feel confident saying it in a meeting. So when you're connecting your content and your presentation, we could have a whole workshop just on writing the content, but that we'll save that for another day. But these are just some high level kind of suggestions that I would include, and just make sure that it's your own voice, it's conversational, because that's what's going to be more engaging in your presentation. Because if you're exuding confidence and you're really proud of what you're saying and what you're speaking about, then it's going to be more engaging to the audience. You also want to cut out those filler words. I know it can be really difficult to write a presentation and then speak and present on it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in terms of how to really make a presentation sound more conversational, but you want to be cutting out those filler words. So when I worked with some students and they would be doing a presentation, they would talk about maybe a co-op example that they had, and they would start by saying, a really cool example is that I did this. I would hope that the example that you're sharing is really cool. That's why you're talking about it. So cut out that intro. The example speaks for itself. So cut out those filler words, because they are going to add so much time to your presentation. And we always would tell our students, just dive right in, get to like the meat and potatoes of the presentation, and cut out all those introductory sentences. Because if you include those for every topic, you could be adding in 3, 4, 5 more minutes to your presentation. And the next one is buzzwords and data. I'm going to show an example on screen here. So this is how I could previously explain my old role. I traveled across Canada and presented to prospective students and families about the U of G. Okay, that's a good way to explain kind of what I did. Let's look at this example. Over a span of 12 weeks, I traveled to 6 provinces and presented to over 4,000 high school students, guidance counselors, and parents about living and learning at the University of Guelph. Same exact example, but by including those tangible numbers, that's what's going to stick out, and that's going to really kind of perk up someone's ears maybe when they're listening to your presentation, because you're actually explaining what you did. They're both the same example. I just was providing a bit more factual evidence. So if you're an entrepreneur and you are talking to investors, you need to have data. You need to have specifics about your company, because a number or a fact is going to stand out so much more about a statement. Anyone can say that they have great leadership capabilities. When a tip for interviews, I've sat on the opposite side of interviews many times. We always ask a question about, talk about your leadership skills, or talk about how you work in conflict management, or, tell us about a time when you had to step in and take control. Everyone can think of an example in their life about that. But if you are actually explaining the situation, what happened, what you did, and what you did after to make sure that those types of mistakes don't happen again, that's actually showing a process. And that is showing someone and demonstrating that you've been in that situation before, and this is how you solved it and what you did for future. So making sure that when you're answering those questions, you need to really look at the whole process. You need to close out the thought. And anytime you can include an experience in an interview question, it's going to definitely make you stand out. Now that we've written our scripts, you have your presentation and you have the content, it's now time to really take that presentation and your speaking notes and looking at different media prompts and videos to support you when you're speaking. But when you are using those videos and PowerPoints, it needs to be an addition of your presentation, and it should always come second. If you maybe, let's say your internet went out, or let's say your PowerPoint wasn't loading, you should be able to give your presentation without having your speaking notes and without having verbal cues, because the content is the biggest piece of the presentation. The PowerPoint, they're just some nice visuals that you can have, and it's a nice way for someone to maybe look at your screen when you're presenting. But when you are including a PowerPoint, please limit the amount of text, because if you're speaking and I had everything that I'm about to say on the screen, you would be reading and not listening to anything that I'm saying. So making sure that you're reducing the text, less is always more, and just keep it nice and simple. I would always suggest avoiding GIFs because it's that replaying video, and I find it so distracting when there's a GIF on a screen. If you really want to show it, maybe have it on one slide and then move to the next slide, take out the GIF, but still have the same content, because I just personally, I can't stop looking at them and they go on a loop. So I would avoid using GIFs when you're presenting. Pictures, if they're blurry, cut them. Whether you have to maybe resize them, maybe you need a different photo. There's nothing worse than a PowerPoint with a blurry photo. And it's really important when you're creating your PowerPoints, when you're doing that double check of your graphics, put it in presenter view. Make sure that it's blown up on your screen and you're looking at what the audience can see. I actually, for this presentation, I should have kept them actually for a comparison, but I had a different meme, similar message, and it was blurry, but when I was working in PowerPoint, it was totally fine. But then when I put it into full screen, it was blurry. It just doesn't look professional. There are so many different photos that you can access. So if you need to resize it, definitely look at doing that, but having no pictures that are going to kind of dampen your presentation. You want to make sure they're really high quality. If you're including videos in your presentation, this is a really nice way to kind of break up if you're the only presenter. It's another form of media to bring in, and some of them can have sound. I do find that videos are really powerful in an online presentation. It also gives you as the speaker an opportunity to grab a sip of water, maybe take a break. But you can also have videos without sound. So I'm going to share one on my screen now. We had a meeting last week and we played this video for a few of our VIP guests. And what was really nice about it was there was no sound, but we had one of our staff members was speaking on top of it. So just like I'm doing now. So this was actually not when I was speaking, so I don't know the script very well, but something like you come into the makerspace, it's located on Gordon Street. You can move around the screen, click on the red dots. It'll bring you to each of the different spots within the space to learn about our equipment. This is where we have creativity tools. Again, so you can time your content to be aligned with the videos that's on the screen. And it's just a nice change of pace for someone when they're listening. And it's also a great way to showcase that you understand the content because you have to line it up when the video is playing. And another great win with these videos is you can embed them right into PowerPoint. You don't have to have the YouTube commercials. You don't have to have the lag. And it's just a really nice way to embed this. So this is just an MP4 file that we shared and it really added to the presentation. So I'm going to stop here. Does anyone have any questions? Maybe post them in the chat. I know that was a lot of content kind of right off the bat. I see. Awesome. I agree, Tori, that virtual presentations is a skill that will likely be needed far beyond COVID. It is here to stay. I agree. Segue is very powerful. Awesome. I agree, Michael. Data does drive engagement. Question here, one thing I run into if I have limited content on slides and when people ask for my slide deck after, do you share notes with them? That's a really good question. I would always, even if I was comfortable sharing my notes with someone, I always share my slide deck in a PDF because if you just send the PowerPoint to them, so I'm going to stop this video because it might be distracting. If you share your PowerPoint with someone, they have the ability to then make changes and you don't want any, if you had data maybe on the slide, you don't want it to be manipulated or the wrong, maybe a slide deleted, maybe it had to go in a certain order. So I would suggest always sharing your slide deck as a PDF and then asking maybe you were speaking to a class and let them know that part of it was actually in your notes and would it be beneficial to have some of those speaking notes or will they be okay with just the PDF document? If they would like the additional notes, sometimes I'll just take them from the PDF or sorry, from the PowerPoint, I'll copy it over and put it into a Word doc. You can also print the PowerPoint. There's a setting in the PowerPoint where you can print and it'll have an image of your slide and it'll have your notes right beside it. So that's another option that you could share with folks. Great question. So if you didn't catch that, that was just an easy segue for me. I didn't really have a natural segue to go from sharing a video to step 2. So I just took a sip of water. I kind of turned all of your attention to popping something in the chat. Again, these segues can be very natural, very easy. They don't need to be a very catchy line or a story. Let's dive into part 2. And these next examples are really going to focus on memorization. And this is probably something that I'm most passionate about when you're preparing for presentations. I hate to break it to all of you, but reading through it a few times is not going to prepare you for a big presentation. If you would have told me in my university days that I would have to get up in front of 400 people and do a 30-minute presentation, the only thing that I had was a view book, there's no way that I would have been able to do it. But through adapting these tips, and it was something that really helped me, was having a process to spending time memorization and a work back schedule and doing a little bit every day, that has really helped me with my memorization. So let's start with these ones here. So finalizing script and creating a PowerPoint. I talked about this a little bit already, but making sure that your content is your main focus. So write your script and your speaking notes, and then you're going to take the content and build your PowerPoint off of that so that they align. Then you're going to go through the process of making sure that your PowerPoint and your script are in the right order. Just last week, I was downloading a PowerPoint and my colleague and I were doing a run through, and I was reading my notes and I kept getting tongue twisted on a line because I realized I had downloaded the wrong PowerPoint and it was 2 versions prior. So you always want to make sure that your PowerPoint, your script are in the right order. A slide didn't get moved around, because that will definitely throw you off in a presentation if you have the slides in the wrong order. So making sure that everything is lined up with your speaking notes. You're then going to read through your script with your notes and prompts, and you're going to do this twice in a presentation voice. And when I say presentation voice, I say this with quotes because I still want it to be conversational. To me, a presentation voice is kind of what I'm doing now. It's clear, it's professional, it's conversational, I'm enunciating. I guarantee you that there have been so many times for all of you folks that you've written the most well-crafted presentation for a meeting. You're so excited to present it. And then you actually try saying it out loud. And even though it's exactly what you had written, you get tongue-tied, even there, I just did it right then. You get tripped up over your words. There's something that you write down that you just cannot say. For me, I cannot say the word real world situation. I always get stuck on it. So I just have cut it out of my presentation skills. It is something that doesn't work for me. Sometimes I get tripped up on entrepreneurship, but unfortunately that's the department that I work in. So I have to get a bit better at saying that word. But you want to make sure that whenever you're presenting, it's going to come off conversational. And so don't just assume that if you write a presentation and then you try presenting it the very next day, it's not going to sound natural, because some things and some essays just don't translate well to online presenting. When you read through your presentation, I want you to read through it in your presentation voice and make edits. So maybe you're striking through some words, you're cutting out filler words, you're adding in a stat, you've realized that you said the same word 4 times. But again, reading it out in that presentation voice, because that's going to be a lot different than if you were just doing some edits and reading through it on your computer. Once your script is done, you're then going to read through it in your presentation voice, and you are not going to stop, even if you mess up. And again, we're not trying to memorize it right here. You're just having it right in front of you on your screen, and you're going to read through it. Because in this virtual world, I can guarantee you there will be times where you have to maybe submit a recording. Maybe you are an entrepreneur and you have to send in a 5-minute pitch on your company, and you have to send in a video file. You could probably spend like maybe 15, 16 times redoing the video because you'll get stuck up on one word. But if you were live, you wouldn't have that opportunity to go back. And so you really need to force yourself to get through the presentation. It's not going to be perfect. Even if I was recording this for the website, I've gotten tongue twisted on a few words, but that's normal. We're all human and you make those mistakes. So it's important to read through your presentation in that presentation voice, no stopping, and just get through it. Once you've gone through it a few times, you're then going to really start that piece of getting in the office environment, and you're going to really prepare for if you're about to present to an audience members. There is something to be said about that psychology example of, writing an exam in the same room that you studied in because of the memory. So if you can, go to your desk at home, don't just be sitting on your couch with your computer, using your script and trying to memorize it. Get into the environment that you're going to be in, set up your chair. I was saying to my coworker before this, I was practicing at home and I don't have a wheelie chair at home, but this one has wheels. So I'm trying very, very hard not to spin my chair right now. So maybe for you, that's something that you just can't do. So you need to swap out your chair when you're presenting. A water cup, I can never present and drink out of a water bottle that doesn't have a straw because I find it looks very awkward on camera. So for me, I always have this one because it's easy for me to take a sip of water. I don't have to worry about spilling it on my face. And so if you can, have a water cup with a straw. When you are now going to start memorizing your presentation, I want you to read through it, but you're actually going to read through it with your script, and you're not going to memorize it from the beginning, because this is going to be the truest representation of what your time is for your presentation. Because if you're reading it word for word, you're not adding in any filler words. And if you are right at time, let's say you have a 10-minute presentation that you have to prepare, and you read through it in your presentation voice, you're reading your script, and you are 9 minutes and 50 seconds, you need to cut at least a minute of content, because I guarantee you that you will add some filler words when you're presenting. Even now, I have kind of some speaking notes, but I've definitely added in a few examples. You want to be, I would say, 2 minutes under, because you will add filler words. You most likely will speak a little bit fast. And so you're going to be, maybe you counteract that by speaking very slow. So you want to be at least a minute and a half to 2 minutes under, also saving time for questions. You can't expect your brain to just recite it, read through it a few times, and then have it memorized. The biggest component of memorization is you need to train your brain properly to say the accurate words. Because if you read one of your paragraphs and then you're like, okay, let me try and memorize it, and you try and just mumble it and see if you can get through it, you're not going to be mumbling it when you're presenting. So you want to maybe read a few paragraphs and then look at your webcam, recite it back, see if you were able to speak through it clearly, see if you made any mistakes. But you most likely, by only memorizing maybe a few sentences at a time, you're going to be training your brain again to say the accurate words. So then when you go and recite it, your brain has said the correct version a few times, not just you read it through once and then you go off, try and memorize it. And then maybe you get stumbled, maybe you're stuck on a word. And so you add in a few filler words, a few filler sentences, and then you do that again. So by doing it that way, you're now training your brain to add in those extra sentences, and they don't have value to your presentation. You've already gone through all of this work to make sure that you have no filler words, you're not adding in that extra content. And so make sure that when you're memorizing, you're sticking to your script and you just do a chunk at a time. Say the first paragraph, look at your webcam, try and recite it back. Then maybe try the intro in part 1, say it back, and then maybe you go intro, part 1, part 2. So that's really important for memorization. Try it in chunks. You can't do it in one night. And again, read it through in your presentation voice, word for word, a few times, and that's going to help you kind of build it up. I see a question here. During committee meetings, I tend to start off peppy and happy, but by the end, I'm tired and overwhelmed. Any ideas on how to stay open and excited? Brain just starts to shut down. I agree. That is something very common, especially because some of these meetings, they can't just be that short length, that 1 hour. So 2+ hours is a really long meeting. I would say incorporating a break whenever you can, whether it's like taking a 5-minute break for the committee, the group, is something that's really helpful. And for me, this probably sounds so silly, but I like to make sure that my like office space and kind of my work environment is like visually appealing to me. So maybe I have a photo of my family beside me. Sometimes I like to have like different like pictures on the wall, a non-cluttered art space, and really just make it a visually appealing kind of office environment. And then also everyone who knows me is going to laugh when I say this, I am a huge foodie, and I eat sour jujubes to bring my sugar levels up in meetings. So I will often have like a jar of sour jujubes on my desk. And if we're taking a quick 5-minute bio break, I'll like have a few jujubes and then I'm good to go. Or maybe I like reward myself, be like, oh, it's a big meeting today, I'm going to look forward to this specific snack after. Staying hydrated, like I think these might sound like similar things, but just having like always having water, I feel like I have to train myself to be like, okay, did I fill up my water bottle? Did I have my coffee this morning? Did I have a snack? Am I well prepared to, have I physically prepared my body to present this meeting? And also if you're taking a break too, Christine, in the meetings, I find that having play some music. If it is a quick little bio break, maybe play a song in the meantime. April had a good suggestion. Mentee surveys and videos. I think a break from media is a really great way to keep those meetings engaging and giving an opportunity for the audience to kind of interact. And yes, jujubes, they are, especially sour jujubes, those are my favorite. Great. This is a great question. What if you're presenting at a webinar and cannot engage in eating, music, and breaks? It is a very good point, Nicola. I think a lot of people have had that opportunity when they don't have that opportunity. It's like a full-on meeting. So I think the biggest suggestion I can give is you want to break up the different presentations when you're presenting, is break up your media. So you're not going to have a PowerPoint the entire time. And whether it's maybe it's a photo on screen and you can utilize the poll feature. Maybe it is having everyone pop in the chat about something. Maybe it's taking a break and having another guest speaker talk about opportunities within your program. I think you have to keep them, the visual stimulation is really important. So whether it's someone else going to be on screen, whether it's going to be different photos, different medias, maybe trying up a new format. Like I sometimes like to use Prezi as well. It's a really great way to interact with people. But I would say understanding too the purpose of the meeting. So if it is a very formal meeting for 2 hours, you're most likely not going to have a meme on screen. So I think it also comes down to what is the goal of this meeting? Is it I'm relaying information for 2 hours? It might not be the most dynamic presentation. That doesn't mean it can't be engaging, but maybe there won't be opportunity for music and breaks and things like that. So I think it's setting the precedent at the beginning, saying, I know we have a lot of content to get through. I'm going to make it as clear and concise as possible. And I guarantee you that there's probably a lot of the content that can be cut out because we feel as presenters, we need to give everything. I could have probably made today's topic honestly like 3 hours. So I think there's a lot of content that we feel that we need to include in our presentation, which a point that I'll get to is you're probably not going to remember at least half of the things that I said today. But what I hope you get from this presentation is that it's something I'm passionate about. It's an area that you want to improve on. You know that you can connect with me after if you have presentation. And even if you leave today with just one tangible resource, that's then going to encourage you to maybe do some more research into this topic. So I think kind of going back to your question is understanding the purpose of the meeting and the audience and realizing and coming to terms that maybe it's not going to be the most like music playing and really interacting with the audience. It might just be a very formal, you're pitching, you're giving information. And sometimes like that's all it can be. You can still make it engaging, but it just might not be the most dynamic presentation. But I think starting that precedent from the beginning will be important for your audience. Perfect. Great questions. Feel free to keep them coming. So now let's dive into different platforms, because I don't know about you folks, but if there is one more platform that gets introduced, I don't think my brain can handle it. From Microsoft Teams Live, Teams Meetings, Zoom, I'm using Miro Board right now. There are so many different platforms and they all have different settings. They have different, I feel like every day I get an update. We had a huge presentation in November and Teams did an update that day. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, but thankfully we had a practice session that day. So you never know when new updates are going to happen. You need to do a test run. Even today, I've used Zoom hundreds of times, but before this meeting started, we all had you in a waiting room and I shared my screen. I made sure that everything came up on the proper monitor. So currently I have my PowerPoint is on my left monitor. I have my presenter view with my notes ahead of me. I actually can't even see any of you folks right now or myself. I'm just looking at my webcam, and then I have the chat on the right-hand side. So you need to get your setup and you need to make sure that every platform, there might be different sharing options. For example, when you share Microsoft Teams, if you click I think it's the top right-hand side, there's an arrow, you can choose to share your screen or your window. If you're sharing your screen, that means that anything that you're moving over to that monitor, folks can see. So if you're changing between a lot of different, maybe let's say you're showing different social media options and you're using different tabs, I really like that I can just have my Chrome open and then I can click through the different tabs. I don't have to reshare my screen a million times. Versus for this presentation, I'm just showing my PowerPoint. So if I moved something over to that screen right now, you actually won't be able to see it because I'm only sharing my PowerPoint. These are the tips and tricks that you need to be aware of when you're doing these online presentations. And I just included a little graphic here. I clipped this right from PowerPoint. Monitor here. So when you are in PowerPoint, when you click slideshow, you can decide where your presentation goes when you click, I don't know the technical term for it, but when you make your presentation full screen, when you're not in the working document, I always like to have mine go to my first monitor. Some folks choose to have their PowerPoint right in front of them and then their notes to the right. I find that I want to minimize the amount of times I'm turning my head. So I was doing a little bit there because I was looking at my PowerPoint to show you the image, but I personally like to maintain eye contact as much as I can. So I find that it's really helpful if you're able to have a second monitor, put your notes on the main screen. You don't need to see people. I know sometimes you're so caught up with like, I need to see people's reactions. Sometimes it actually throws me. And I don't even know, I mean, there is a chat, so I know that you can all be listening, but I find it when I worked in recruitment, I would present to like 400 people online and I wouldn't know if they were actually listening or if they were there because I had no response back from them. But you need to treat every presentation like there are a million people watching and they're smiling and they are so engaged because you can't get that feedback from them. So you kind of have to take it on yourself. So whatever setup you need, play around with it. This is something that works well for me. My notes in front of me, my PowerPoint to the left, because again, your PowerPoint is just a guide. It's not driving your presentation. So play around with it, set up your monitors. And in terms of looking at a webcam, a sticky note or a sticker on your webcam is something super helpful. So when you're practicing, I would encourage you, whether you have an external monitor hooked up to your computer or just your camera, put like a little smiley face sticker or just take a sticky note and put it right beside your camera so you can draw your attention to looking at your webcam. It's going to feel awkward for a little bit, but trust me, it's going to be a great way to draw your attention to a focal point. And then you're going to learn that that is where you're going to be looking the entire time. I find I was in a Zoom meeting this morning, there's only two of us, and I found that I kept looking at my colleague. So I was looking down at my screen because I thought I was making eye contact with her. But really to her on her screen, she was just seeing me like looking down at my screen. I wasn't making eye contact. So I actually will sometimes cover my colleague's face. This sounds awful, but trust me, it works. Cover their face and put like a document over top because you're going to be then making eye contact with your webcam and having more of a conversation. So try that in your next meeting. Another tangible tip I'll suggest too is actually have your coworkers turn off their cameras in a meeting. I know that's backwards on everything we've been trying to incorporate, but have them turn off their camera because you will be forced to look into your webcam because you don't have anywhere else to look. I don't know about you, but when I attend a workshop and the presenter, for various reasons, maybe just their screen sharing or whatnot, and they don't have their camera on, I don't know where to look. And I'm like, do I look at the other attendees? Do I look at the PowerPoint? I don't really know what to do. But by having everyone's camera off, it's going to force you to learn how to look into the webcam and maintain eye contact the entire time. So try a few of those things out, try working with the different monitors, practice run. I will even have like notes about like click arrow, click include sound, because how many times have we all shared our screen without including sound? Write those little notes for you. And it's really important to kind of have those different cheat sheets to help you when you're presenting. And yes, Janet, that's a really good point. So live transcript for people to access that. Yes, 100%. Closed captions. I would encourage all of you when you're doing presentations and meetings and webinars, let folks know where that closed caption feature is. In terms of those screen prompts and notes, kind of where we're going with now, I've just included a suggestion here. This is something that I used for our bigger picture series in November. And this was an activity where I presented at the beginning, but then I was the Teams live producer. So I wasn't presenting anymore. And I had to know I was responsible for putting people's cameras live. For any of you that have used Teams Live before, I was responsible for sharing my screen, playing videos, and making sure that the event was running smoothly. And I needed to have my notes perfectly lined up because I couldn't miss one thing on when I had to. You can see here, I had to pause the video, I had to stop sharing, I had to unmute myself, I had to put my video on, my camera. And there are times when you're presenting where we just talked so much about maintaining eye contact. When is the right time to look away from your notes, and how do you have your notes as the prompt, but somewhere where you can look quickly, know where you're going, and then look back and maintain eye contact. So something that I would suggest is maybe when you're taking your speaking notes, this was a bit different because it was a script for my panelists. So I had written out for them kind of word for word their notes. But something that was really helpful for me was having the color coordination. So I knew that if it was blue, that was for me, and I was turning on camera. I found it was really helpful for me just to have very quickly little notes. So you can see here, stop share screen, include sound, select video, zoom to fill. Those are actual cues in Microsoft Teams Live. And how I divided out this event plan, This is the speaking notes and the content. This is the tangible logistic video tech. And these were the announcements that were going off at the same time to make sure that I was copying and pasting them and putting them at the chat at the same time when someone was presenting. So by dividing out your section, because I guarantee if you just print your script and put it beside you, you are going to get so lost. You're not going to know where to go. So break it up. Maybe take your script, if it is full sentences, have that version, and then maybe make a new format and a new document once you've presented it and you just want to have a few cues. Maybe just have it in bullet points, have it highlighted. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll write in the Word document, slide 1, I'll highlight it yellow, and then I'll write what the content is. So maybe it'll be like JK, those are my initials, intro slide. Maybe it'll be slide 2, picture of toolkit. So I know that what I'm saying is lined up with what's on screen. So you want it to be a prompt of a note that you can access during your presentation, but don't just print it off the script because you're going to get so lost. You might not turn the page at the right time. I will sometimes print it out and have like the 3 documents in front of me. Sometimes I will have my iPad and I'll put it right beside me. Anytime you're using speaking notes, you want them as close to your webcam as possible. So it's a quick little glance and then you can go back to the webcam. So try out some different formats. I'm happy to share some event plans and templates that have worked for me. But again, that color coordination, minimizing the amount of text will be some really helpful speaking prompts. And again, we're still in that preparation. There's a lot that gets put into when you're creating that presentation and that content. And now that you have, so we've got the content done, we've got the media, we've figured out the tech side. Now it's all that pace, that tone, that expression. And the biggest tool that you can use is to record yourself because that is the only way you are going to catch your pain points. I personally never smiled when I presented. I have a very friendly voice and I would, raise my eyebrows, but I never smiled when I presented. And it was something I really had to work on. I had honestly written in my script, like smile. One of my segues was to remember that I needed to start smiling again. Some tips when you're recording, you might not realize that you are saying the exact same word multiple times. I'm not embarrassed to share that one of my very first presentations in front of a high school, the coaches come with us or the mentors to make sure that we're okay. I said the word so 73 times in 30 minutes. Nicole, if any of you know her, she's lovely. She works in the admission office. We still joke about it to this day. And she kept a sticky note going of how many times I said so during a presentation. It was my filler word. Whenever I didn't know what to say next, I always started with the word so. And I, to this day, will have to catch myself on how many times I say it. But I never would have known that unless she had told it to me. So by recording yourself, you're going to catch those pain points. Maybe you realize that you talk with your hands too much. Maybe you realize that you're spinning your chair in your presentation. Maybe you realize that there's some crazy background that you shouldn't be using. So record yourself, catch those pain points. Maybe you realize that you're speaking too slow, you're speaking too fast, and that is just a way to really coach yourself and see what is working and what isn't. We already talked a little bit about webcam, so using a sticky note, and again, practice, like anytime you can practice in front of someone, practice in a mirror. That's a really tough way to criticize yourself in terms of like, are you smiling enough? But again, these are coachable moments to realize what's not working. And someone might not tell you if you're presenting in front of a colleague, they might not catch those little things. So by being able to record yourself, looking back at it, listening to your pace. Sometimes if I'm doing a presentation, if it's like maybe a short one, and this is really great, especially for entrepreneurs, if you're working on like a 1 minute, 3 minute, or 5 minute pitch, or even a student, if you're running for, I know a lot of the exec campaigns are going on right now, use the voice note feature on your phone. Just talk for a few minutes and then play it back to yourself and see what you catch. So look at those different features. And again, you have to record yourself. And also with the recording, it's really interesting to see what other folks can see of you. I sit in a lot of meetings where their webcam is it's on the side, so we can just see their side angle the entire time, which is very tough if you're an audience member and trying to be engaging with them. So although maybe the folks are in front of you on your screen, maybe your webcam's on the side, and you might not have realized that until you watch the recording back to see what the audience is seeing. So again, you want to understand their viewpoint, and so definitely encourage you to record yourself. It's awkward. I still don't like doing it, but it is one of the best tools that made me realize what was important. And yes, Christine, it will be sent out. It will be posted on YouTube, hopefully by the end of this week. So we just spent 40 minutes on the preparation piece, which again is the most important, but now diving into the presentation piece, I love this meme. Be mindful of guests turning on their camera and audio, because sometimes you don't know, maybe they are, let's say they are listening to it on Zoom and they're kind of have their phone in their side and they're just listening to it because they're running from one meeting to the next, and they're not going to turn on their camera because maybe they're walking across campus, but they really want to listen into this workshop. I personally don't like the feeling of having being pressured to turn my camera on, because maybe they don't have the best spot to turn on and have a background. Maybe they are they're in the library and they want to be respectful of those that are around them, not having their permission to turn on, kind of so that they're displayed behind them. So just be mindful of that. If you do need someone to have their camera on, please tell them ahead of time, put it in a reminder email. That's just out of respect for your audience members. And use the chat feature like we have today. So many of you have been so engaging in the chat, which has been awesome. And really be cautious of the amount of breakout rooms and polls that you're using. As Tori mentioned, this hybrid format is not going away anytime soon. And there will be some presentations that you're giving in person that will not translate into virtual. I led a presentation with my colleague last week. We had done it in person in the fall. It went great. We quickly had to transition to it online. We realized that the amount of breakout rooms does not translate well, because when we were in person, they just chatted with their groups and it worked really well. But online did not work well. I think we had them in it worked well. It was a great presentation, but we just were reflecting on, maybe let's limit a breakout room next time. Let's limit the amount of polls that we're doing, because sometimes there are just too many ways that you're kind of adding in what cannot translate well virtually. You just need to accept that and maybe try something new. Simple things like closing your email. There's nothing worse than hearing someone's email go off a million times when you're presenting. Close your email and put your do not disturb on Teams, because someone can still send you a message, but you're not going to get that dinging feature every time. Even if your status says busy or available, you'll have that sound feature every time. So I recommend anytime you're presenting, just put your do not disturb on Teams. Last few minutes here, we just have a few more slides of content, but when you're presenting, I encourage you to enable the waiting room, especially even if it's just a meeting or a presentation. I find sometimes I never know when to join. Like, do I join 5 minutes before? Do I join a few minutes before? Does that make them seem like I'm late? So you never really know. But if you're presenting, I would encourage you to enable the waiting room if you're in Zoom or Teams. That just gives you a few more minutes to practice screen sharing, make sure you're all set up with your monitors, make sure your PowerPoint's good to go. You can connect with your presenters ahead of time, because you could admit your staff members, make sure you're good to go. And then maybe someone else they just were joining to make sure that they were getting connected. They'll get the message that the host will let them in soon. It also just adds, I feel like, a level of professionalism. And anytime you can, if it's a presentation, have an intro slide. Even if you don't have a PowerPoint deck to support your presentation, just make a very simple slide. It's going to add so much to your presentation. This was one that I've used for previous events where people would join. I would have my camera off. I'd let them know we're beginning shortly, and I would often play music so that when they join, it's really exciting, it's upbeat. And then when the song was over, I would turn on my camera and welcome them to the session. It just, I find, adds that level, as I said, of professionalism. And knowing your audience. We talked a little bit about this, kind of, I believe Christine had made the comment about, or Nicola, maybe if it was a webinar and it was maybe more like research focused or a committee meeting. Know your audience. So for example, this meme, I never would have included if I was presenting in front of faculty in terms of like a donor meeting or research and stats. So making sure that your content and your media is going to be applicable for your audience. And I want you all now to think about a time that when you were in a meeting or a session and you didn't have any questions and it was really engaging, you found it informative, it was everything that you needed to know. If you were in an in-person meeting, you would often be like nodding their head. And as the presenter, you would get that verbal cue back from them that, okay, they understand it, it's engaging for them. And that was very reassuring as a presenter. But in an online world, for example, I can't see any of you right now. If I didn't have the chat, I wouldn't know if this was sticking, if it was helpful. I don't know if you've all dropped off the meeting. I can't see that. But as a presenter, I have to think I'm doing the best job that I can. And it's very engaging for all of you folks. So I think when you're presenting, don't be alarmed if no one's posting something in the chat. Maybe they're really enjoying it and they even feel nervous posting something in the chat or introducing themselves. And so being mindful of that silence is okay. Sometimes it means that they're just so overwhelmed with all the information and they're taking down notes. That's really important. So get comfortable with the silence. It's okay. And again, mistakes happen. Take a breath. I have, oh my goodness, I probably have stories and stories of the times I've said an incorrect word when I presented. I was speaking too fast. I combined a word. I think I presented in front of a high school and I was trying to say that we were a female friendly engineering program, but then I think I switched to maybe I was going to say women friendly. So I think I said WEML in a presentation. I combined women and female, and you just have to laugh about it because those mistakes will happen and that's okay. You need to move on. If you're ever in a presentation and you forget what your next line is, you like need a breath, you will think it's like the awkwardest silence in the world, but to the audience, they might just think you're taking a breath. Maybe they aren't even looking at you right now because they are taking notes or they picked up their cell phone and they're responding to a message. They're not looking at you the entire time. So it's okay for you to take a second, grab a sip of water, pause, maybe ask a question. That's like my favorite thing to do is say, okay, let's take a moment to pause. Any questions here? And then I'll like take a look at my notes. Or maybe I'll make a joke about it and say, oh, sorry, like my coffee hasn't set in yet today. Like brain's a little slow this morning. Be human about it. Mistakes will happen, but just keep going. You don't need to apologize because the audience, unless you make note of it, they have no idea that you've messed up. So just keep going with the presentation. Mistakes will happen. And the last thing is to be memorable, because how much information did I just share with you in 55 minutes? And you probably can't remember a lot of the tips and tricks that I shared. But as I said earlier, I hope that you found it engaging because I was confident. I tried to be as energetic as I could throughout the presentation. And whenever you're presenting, you want to make sure that they're going to treat it as kind of that initial contact with you. So although I would include in my presentations dates, deadlines, information, I would get so frustrated when someone would come up to me and ask me something that I had literally just said in my presentation, but maybe they were writing something down. Maybe they were making a note that they wanted to, check out our next workshop series. And so I think it's really important to not feel frustrated if someone asks a clarifying question, and remembering that presentations are always meant to be a hook. I could have shared so much content with all of you folks for 3-4 hours, but I gave kind of just enough to hopefully get you excited about public speaking and want to encourage you to learn more about it. And maybe you'll reach out to the Wood Center and attend more of our workshops. It's always that continuum, and it's just a hook, and you don't need to include every stat, every example, because you're sharing more about you. You will now associate kind of myself and Teo, who kind of are running this workshop, with the Wood Center. And by being, we are professional, we are engaging, we are dynamic, you're going to remember us and remember the center. So maybe down the line, you're going to attend another event. So be memorable. A good example that I like to share, I'll kind of just finish off with this, is how many times have you been in a workshop or a meeting where maybe the content was your favorite, but the professor, the speaker wasn't engaging? You probably didn't have a great session. But then now think about if you didn't like the content, but the professor was so engaging and they were so dynamic and so personable, you're probably going to that session would have probably been more beneficial to you. So everything that I just shared or taught with you, odds are you're not going to remember it, but remember your energy, the stories that you shared. When I finished off my liaison presentations, something that I always finished with was an emotional story about when my roommates and we made this graduating Griffin bucket list, and we had about 30 things to check off because it was really beginning to sink in that we'd soon be, walking across the stage at convocation, saying goodbye to one another. And that was really, really tough for us. We were best friends, had lived together for 3 years. And the last thing that we had put on our bucket list to cross off was to say goodbye. And to me, that was like, I still get chills when I say that because it was a really big part of my university career and the friends that I met. So even though I'd spent 30 minutes sharing about, apply to the U of G, we're research intensive, all of that, the last thing that I always left them with is university is about an experience. It's about building those memories and building those connections. And Guelph is a great place to start that. So I think whenever you're presenting, just always remember that human connection piece to it and be memorable, because that's what's going to hook someone with your presentation. And with that, pretty good, 1 minute to spare. I know we are just at time, but if folks have any questions, this will be shared to our YouTube channel. I hope that was helpful. As I said, it was a lot of me talking kind of at you, but I know that I didn't want to put anyone on the spot. So we can definitely look at future workshops about maybe some more breakout rooms, anything like that to make it a bit more tangible. But if folks have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I know it is 1 o'clock, so if you have to go, please feel free to head out. I see there's a question, if accents. I would say, Precious, no, I think everyone's very accommodating. We all have come from different backgrounds and different kind of walks of life. And I think it's what's really important to anyone presenting is always, whether you have an accent or not, being professional, enunciating. And again, as Janet mentioned, the closed captions is a great feature. Maybe if someone's having trouble maybe understanding someone, be able to ask clarifying questions. As a presenter, I would just say, I do, maybe you could say like, I do have an accent, so feel free to turn on closed captions, or if you need me to clarify something, please let me know. But I would say if someone's attending a presentation, they're really excited to hear from you about the content, and that's the most important thing. But I think with that, Teo, I'll turn it back over to you. We're just 1 minute over.